He's scaling a tree in the hope of finding a female.
Hollow Knight is perhaps my single favorite game of all time. With amazing combat and exploration, impressive visuals, and a fleshed out world with tons of lore, it's about everything one could ask for in a $15 indie game. There's a lot to the story thematically, and I have a lot to say about it. And it's not like us Hollow Knight fans have had anything else to talk about for the past 3 years? Has it been 3 years? This video is my first video essay, and the first video I'll be doing on this channel. I chose this topic specifically because it's something I'm very passionate and knowledgeable about. I also chose this topic because when my friends heard some of my theories on the game, they really wanted me to make a video essay about what I have to say. To clarify, this essay isn't going to be focused on lore and more so on thematic analysis. You're probably wondering what about the third part of this video's title, and I will get to that. For now, just bear in mind, I have no statistical evidence of this, but tons of anecdotal evidence that a lot of transgender people do not fuck around about Hollow Knight. We love Hollow Knight almost as much as Celeste or Fallout New Vegas. It just didn't really catch on as a stereotype the same way. Exhibit A. I am a transgender woman, and I love Hollow Knight more than both of those games. Although I do love both of those games. My name is Thalia the Muse, I use she/her pronouns, and here is my video essay on queer-coded insect euthanasia. Heat from fire, fire from heat. Heat from fire, fire from heat. Heat from fire, fire from... Fuck it. I'm gonna assume you've played Hollow Knight. If you haven't, go do that. Then come back. I'm not doing a long-winded plot summary, especially because it's an open-world game, and there's a bunch of videos that summarize the plot better than I could. I'm just gonna focus on the lore that matters to the overall themes. Spoiler warning in 3, 2, 1. Who are you in Hollow Knight? You are a knight, but not the Hollow Knight. I'll be referring to the protagonist by Hornet's nickname for it, Little Ghost. And a common misconception about Little Ghost, other than the fact that they're the Hollow Knight, is that they are a bug. Yes, Hollow Knight's world is one full of bugs, but the knight is more so wearing a bug's corpse as a skin. In actuality, you are more comparable to a golem, constructed of a substance known as void. This black, oil-like substance, found in the darkest depths of the kingdom, is a completely mindless sludge, lashing out with tentacles at anyone who gets too close. Yet the Pale King thought he could construct a being made of void, a being perfect for containing the Radiance, a malevolent entity made of pure thought and dreams. Having been almost forgotten due to the bugs of Hallownest worshipping the king instead, the Radiance decided to cling on to its fading light by taking over the minds of the king's subjects. The king's counterattack was this. The Radiance inhabited the minds of living beings, slowly corrupting them and turning their thoughts against them. A being with no identity, no thoughts, no will, no opinions, no gender, nothing? This could be a being capable of imprisoning the Radiance inside of it, preventing the spread of infection. So he had a lot of kids, not going to explain the birds and bees to you, and fill those shells with void. Despite its mindlessness, you see, the void can be given a purpose by a higher being. In fact, the king made several beings out of void. His castle is full of these armored, almost mechanical void creatures that act as his minions and guards. Little Ghost, along with the actual Hollow Knight, was one of the few survivors of these experiments, with innumerable of their kin intentionally trapped within the abyss. And Little Ghost isn't even the one who was supposed to survive. The one who was supposed to survive is the one we know as the Hollow Knight, and... to quote the White Lady, its supposed strength was ill-judged. It was tarnished by an idea instilled. they're not doing so hot. They've seen better days. The king was trying to make a being with enough sentience to contain the moth while also being mindless enough to not fall to its influence. To ensure the Hollow Knight was up to the task in both body and lack of mind, the king put his scion through intense training in the path of pain. In the process of this training, an idea was instilled. Formerly, the pile of black sludge held together by the corpse of a bug had no identity, but the Pale King gave it one. Through the training, the Hollow Knight began to see itself as what the king saw it as, a savior of Hallownest, and the first of the king's children to truly make it proud. It developed a sense of self, limited as it was, to being a savior, a knight, and a son. Well, not a son, it still doesn't have a gender, but with this new identity, it developed a desire. Perhaps it was a desire to save Hallownest, or perhaps it was a desire to make its father proud. Either way, the desire was to validate its own existence, and it was purely this desire to save the kingdom that ironically and tragically led to the downfall of the Hollow Knight. The Radiance was eventually able to escape its newfound prison, and the kingdom fell to pieces in spite of the sacrifices of the Pale King, the Hollow Knight, and an unfathomable amount of dead children, like enough to make an entire biome. In spite of everything the king and the knight tried to do to preserve the glorious kingdom, it collapsed under its own weight. But it wasn't all for nothing. If it was all for nothing, the video would end here, but it doesn't. By the time your character manages to crawl out of a mass grave of your own brethren, you find yourself in a post-apocalyptic kingdom full of zombies controlled by the Radiance and her psychic infection. The kingdom is already dead. The City of Tears is living up to its name in more ways than one. The Forgotten Realms are well forgotten and eventually became the infected crossroads. For every living being you see a corpse. And most living beings you encounter are swiftly rendered into a corpse. Much like many apocalypse movies, you are a lone wanderer of the corpse of the world. There are the beginnings of new civilizations and the remainders of old ones, but everywhere you look, you see death. Even in the mirror. Take a look at Little Ghost. It's a simple design and an adorable design, but it's also a rather haunting one. A figure in a black cloak with a skull for a head carrying nothing but a blade. This is a Grim Reaper. I'm gonna get it over with and say it now. You're playing as the Grim Reaper. Now, plenty of bugs also look like you. Hornet, Zode, all the vessels. Importantly though, all of these people come from the Pale King. Well, we don't know for sure with Grey Prince Zode, but that's a separate theory. Most importantly, the role you play both in narrative and gameplay is one of the Grim Reaper. You travel around the world killing things. The main questline of the game boils down to you killing 3 things, so you can kill another thing, so you can kill another thing. Obviously a lot of games involve mass murder like this, but it's not just the fact that you're killing things, it's what you're killing. Almost every boss fight in Hollow Knight can be separated into one of 3 categories, although sometimes there's overlap. Category number 1, you're killing a random animal that happens to be in your way. Category number 2, you're facing a powerful opponent to prove to them or someone else that you are even more powerful. Category number 3, and the most important one, you're killing something that should either die now or should have died a while ago. Perhaps for its own good. Hell, going back to category number 1, Brooding Moloch I put in category number 1, but it should be in category number 3, it's just subtler than, say, the Dreamnail bosses. At first it just looks like a random savage predator, but look where you fight it. You fight it in a mound of the corpses of its own kin, and just read what the Hunter's Journal has to say about it. Ferocious but extremely social creature. Becomes aggressive if not able to mingle with its own kind. I hear this beast crying out sometimes as I prowl the caverns, although I've never actually laid eyes on it. Who or what is it calling for? As far as I can tell, its voice is never answered. And the Dreamnail dialogue isn't even concerned with you. While most animalistic bugs in Hollow Knight will be thinking about food, or light, or danger when you Dreamnail them, the brooding Moloch isn't concerned with any of that. It's not thinking about you, or the fact that you're about to kill it. It's just lonely, looking for friends, looking for a mate, and it will never find one. The only other brooding Moloch is on the other side of the kingdom, captured to fight and die in the Colosseum, with the same Dreamnail dialogue. Even if these two are capable of producing young, they never will. While we see its relatives flourishing in the ancient basin, the species of the brooding Moloch is doomed to extinction. In that regard, the Molochs are Hallonests equivalent to the... I'm not going to try and pronounce this. It's too serious a topic for me to butcher this, but you may have heard of this bird and its depressing tale. Spreading around the internet is the haunting and depressing call of the male bird, the last male bird of its kind. The last bird of its kind. The song's been playing in the background for some time. The male bird is trying to sing with a female of its kind, unaware that it's the last of its kind. Much like many of Hollow Knight's foes, the brooding Moloch goes from an imposing foe to a walking tragedy upon further inspection. A lone wolf howling at the moon, echoing through empty caverns, waiting for the curtains to close. And you are those curtains. Little Ghost can be slowed, but never stopped. No matter what kills you, you will always wake up back at the bench to try again. I don't think this is just for gameplay's sake. I strongly feel this is a demonstration of where you fit in this world's theology. Even the mightiest warriors are humbled beneath you, even if you choose to spare them. When you finally reach the castle of your father the king, you find seemingly still on his throne, still keeping up the illusion that he's alive, that he's protecting his kingdom, but a few mere strikes reveal him to be dead. And you, still alive, to sit on the throne of Hallownest yourself, to claim this dead kingdom as yours. You may be asking, if you're an immortal manifestation of death, what's with the mysterious ghost you leave behind? And what does any of this have to do with transgender gamer girls? I'm getting to it. Each of us leaves an imprint of something when we die, a stain upon the world. I don't know how much longer this kingdom can bear the weight of so many past lives. I want to go back to the Radiance, and specifically how you defeat it. If you just want to beat Hollow Knight, you can just beat the Hollow Knight, and while maneuvering around Hallownest will require you to kill a variety of bosses, you only need to slay the 3 Dreamers, whose power is keeping the Temple of the Black Egg sealed. Once they're defeated, you can walk in there, euthanize your sibling, and take upon yourself the burden of the infection. You yourself become the Hollow Knight. Here's the part where I want to say that I was going to go into a full-on analysis of how both knights can also be interpreted as Christ figures, but I had to cut that for time. Besides, I'm not an expert on Christianity, and I feel like if you understand the basics of both Christian and Hollow Knight lore, you can probably figure out that line of analysis for yourself. Regardless, when Little Ghost dies for the sins of all bug kind, you're trying something that already failed. There are many who believe that Little Ghost is a perfect vessel that the Pale King sought, but think about how much social interaction it took to corrupt the original Hollow Knight. Little Ghost formed several bonds throughout their journey through Hallownest, such as with Quirrell or Cloth. It's a temporary solution to a permanent problem, and it does keep Little Ghost alive. But to do what? To sit around in the chamber for the rest of its existence until it inevitably falls to the Radiance? Death would be preferable. There's a reason why Hornet proposes a more permanent solution. Ghost, I see you face the place of your birth, and now drape yourself in the substance of its shadow. Though our strength is born of similar source, that part of you, that crucial emptiness, I do not share. She's not void. But in order to face the light, you must first face the darkness within you. That is what your half-sister Hornet tells you after you explore the Abyss and obtain the Shade Cloak, a vital movement item for beating the game. In order to get it, you have to bathe yourself in void, an act that almost resembles a Christian baptism, seen as a spiritual death and rebirth, but there's more to your birthplace than the Shade Cloak. First, let's go back to the King's Castle. When you kick him off his throne, you get a white fragment, which turns out is one half of his soul. To get the other half, you have to find his wife, the White Lady, which requires the Shade Cloak and the death of the Traitor Lord. The White Lady will give you the other fragment, and once you have both, you have the King's Soul. The King's Soul is an interesting charm on a gameplay and thematic level, even though it sucks. It gives you slow soul regeneration, soul being the resource you use to cast spells and heal yourself. Usually, you have to strike living beings with your sword to gain soul. This is a core part of the gameplay loop. To heal, you must fight. To have, you must take, creating an interesting risk-reward system. The King's Soul completely removes this risk. If you can just sit still long enough, you get all the soul you can hold. You're effectively immortal. So, why does it suck? Well, for one, it costs 5 charm slots. What the fuck? The Pale King is quoted to say, "No cost too great," but I speak for everyone when I say this cost is too great. And the regeneration isn't fast enough to justify using this in combat. Using the King's Soul, you could theoretically live forever, but it would be a sedentary and boring lifestyle. And yes, it has use in some tough platforming segments like Path of Pain, where you can wait as long as you want between jumps, but Hive Blood serves the same purpose for one less slot. This is by design. The King's Soul represents the King's mentality, and the mentality of many Hollow Knight characters. Preserve yourself, preserve your life, preserve your way of life. Even in the face of change and death, never accept change or death. It's the antithesis to the character and the game you're playing, and the world you find yourself inhabiting. Suffice to say, few people are sad to see the King's Soul go. Once you have the King's Soul, its only real purpose from there is to be sacrificed to the Void, at which point you are treated to a cutscene revealing some lore we already discussed, and then the King's Soul permanently becomes the Void Heart. The Void Heart takes up no charm slots and cannot be removed from you. It is a part of you, forever and ever. Now that you have accepted the emptiness within you, the Void is united under your will. Beforehand, you'd leave a stain upon the world anytime you died, a manifestation of your regret, which you would have to defeat to move on. These are the shades, your own inability to let go of the past. Now that you have fully accepted your role as death, and death as a concept, the Void obeys you, and your shade is no longer puts up a fight. More importantly, it is only with the Void Heart in your palm that you can face the Radiance and put an end to it. And once you destroy the Radiance, Little Ghost itself dies. Or rather, it lets go of its material form. It's heavily implied you now join your siblings in the mindless, driveless void. Rather than spending the rest of eternity locked away in a cell, you find peace in oblivion. So these are the base level themes in Hollow Knight. All in all, there's nothing particularly radical in any of these statements that I just said. Yes, who knew the grimdark Souls-like had themes of death and letting go of the past, yada yada yada. Well, as you can see by the video length, I'm not done. I'm never done. Finally, I am going to address the elephant beetle in the room. How am I going to tie Hollow Knight into the transgender experience? Well, firstly, queer people, especially trans men, women, and NBs, fucking love bugs. There may truly be no deeper reason behind Hollow Knight's trans fanbase than this. Transbase? Hollow Knight's transbase? When you're someone who is misunderstood, discriminated against, and generally mistreated based entirely on people's irrational fears and aesthetical preferences, you have a tendency to relate to and even defend animals that get the same treatment, such as bugs. But here's where I make my thesis a little more specific. I've noticed that all the trans women I know who enjoy Hollow Knight got into it before they transitioned. before they even knew what they were. And while games like Celeste get credited for turning people trans by putting a voice to these feelings that people have lived with for their entire lives, potentially, I feel like what Hollow Knight's story does for trans people is a lot more depressing. I'm going to be discussing some heavy topics in depth now, such as suicide and transphobia. I'll probably put a trigger warning earlier on in the video, but here is just one more reminder to click off if you want to, because I know there have been times in my life when this kind of thing is the last thing I want to hear about, especially when talking about fucking 2D platformers anyway. The first thing to note is the androgyny of Little Ghost. And many of the characters in the game, to be honest, a lot of trans people often cling on to androgyny as a band-aid, and may even identify as agender or other non-binary identities, while still in denial about being a binary trans person. I'm not saying that all non-binary people are just binary trans people in progress, by the way, that's fucking stupid, but I do know that I strongly considered being agender, and then identified as gender fluid for a while, before I came to the current conclusion that I'm happy with. A lot of others I know went through a similar phase where they thought they were non-binary or something like that, but they ended up just being a full-on trans man and trans woman. Everyone's journey is different, everyone's endpoint is valid, yada yada yada, you get the point. For oppressed trans people, regardless of whether they're binary or non-binary in the end, playing as a truly genderless character and enjoying it may reflect a subconscious desire to escape the physical and social implications of gender identities. You may not yet be comfortable identifying with characters explicitly masculine or feminine, but you still know you don't want to be what you are. Another important clarification: just because you like playing characters of a gender other than your assigned gender at birth does not mean you are trans. However, do your future self a favor and examine what it does mean sooner than later. I didn't just yap about Hollow Knight's themes of accepting death for God knows how long just for fun. Being a repressed trans person is hard. Depending on where you live, it can be easier or harder than coming out as trans, but the detachment from reality that trying to repress gender dysphoria causes has a very unique effect. You can't go above it, you can't go below it, you can't go around it. By God, is it hard to muster the strength to go through it, so you don't go through it. You try to pretend it's not there. You seal it deep within the earth of your mind, try to erase it from your consciousness, but it slowly finds a way to creep back in. Just like the forgotten light of the radiance or the mindless tendrils of the void, you cannot think it away. It begins to taint everything you experience, some more than others. I was lucky enough to have a strong social network when I was going through this awkward period, and I don't think I would have survived, quite frankly, if it weren't for that. Before I transitioned, I struggled to perceive my own identity. It felt like I barely had one, and if I did, it wasn't my own. To most humans, identity is everything, especially in individualistic communities like the USA. People who aren't from marginalized groups often downplay how important identity is because they've always had a right to theirs. They don't truly understand what it's like to not be yourself in such a fundamental way that every interaction you have with another person feels wrong, that you can't even recognize yourself in the mirror without wanting to throw up. And when a problem like this goes unchecked or repressed for too long, a certain melancholy can overwhelm the mind. The whole world starts to seem darker, less interesting. You focus on the external environments that reflect your internal environments, and that is reflected in the art you enjoy, the music you listen to, the games you play. Soon there's no escape anywhere, not even in your sleep. And death, once a source of fear, can start to seem like the only way out. Even if you aren't actively trying to end your own life, the idea still comforts you more than it should. Often bigots will throw around the high suicide rate of the transgender population like it's proof of anything other than their own sins, but it's true that a lot of people within our communities take their own lives. Many do so without ever realizing why they feel the way they feel. That's the worst thing about those numbers. They might be higher. All those repressed people who never had the social network to help them through, or didn't have the understanding of themselves to figure out what was wrong, or people who were just born in the wrong place, the wrong time. It's not like it's their fault, it's just Hollow Knight's story has a draw to people who feel this way, I think. The game's story is written in favor of the void. It's not just that the void represents death, it represents ego death, a term meaning the partial or total obliteration of one's identity, where the lines between you and other people are blurred, erased, or perhaps never even existed at all. To lack an identity, and perhaps to lack a life, is a conscious or subconscious fantasy for many people, regardless of their identity, but it disproportionately affects the trans community, especially those who are still actively grappling with their identity. And I think the tragedies of the vessels, including the Hollow Knight, could be seen to reflect a trans woman's relationship with masculinity. The Hollow Knight starts pure, a being without the burden of identity, but the responsibility placed on the Hollow Knight by their father to suffer in silence, to suppress their feelings, to make him and the kingdom proud through a sacrifice of autonomy and emotional expression. The Hollow Knight suffers through all of this, because doing this makes its father proud and it doesn't know anything else. It's been conditioned from birth to think that this is the way it has to be, and it can't imagine another happier life, so it clings on to this even when it's clear it can't cling on anymore. I should say I don't think this is intentional on Team Cherry's part. I just think this is why Hollow Knight sticks with so many boys who grow up to be women. The story is full of people who have lost their previous identity, or their role in society, or their purpose in life, and many of these people welcome death. When you destroy the ghost of Markoth, he doesn't rebuke you. He's in awe. How nothing else could touch him, not kings, not knights, not time itself. He refers to you as the darkness that has come to consume him. And like almost all the Dream Warriors, he eventually accepts the end that your blade represents. So is my argument that Hollow Knight is pro-death, pro-suicide, pessimistic, nihilistic, anti-natalist? No. It would fucking suck if it did. And here's where I'm going to modify my previous thesis on Hollow Knight being about death. I think it's actually about something greater than death, if you can believe such a thing exists. I believe. Tarot cards are used to supposedly tell the future, so you might be horrified if you come up with the tarot card of death. Except this knight in not-so-shining armor doesn't represent death. It can, but not always. In fact, the card of death represents change. Death is in itself a kind of change, but rarely is it the change that needs to happen. There's one side quest in Hollow Knight which completely tears apart any idea that this game is telling us we should kill ourselves. The nailsmith, once he finally finishes making the perfect blade for you, realizes he has no more purpose in life and requests that you strike him down with your pure nail so he may feel its touch before he dies. The thing is, you don't have to kill him, you can just kind of leave him there. And if you do leave him alone, he won't jump. He won't track you down to try and get you to kill him. He'll move on from being a blacksmith. He moves in with Paintmaster Shio, another bug who has laid down their weapon in favor of a new life, and they become a happy little gay couple. The nailsmith later thanks you for not killing him, saying his decision was rash and ill-informed. There is more to life than the life he knew before. And while beating the game requires you to be the Grim Reaper, you don't have to just be death. You can go around helping a lot of people. And quite a few of these side quests involve facilitating positive change of some kind. The last stag, who acts as your fast travel, has been sitting around doing God knows nothing for God knows how long. But you open up the stations he once traveled, find some stations he never knew existed, and eventually help him find the old nest of the stags, where you find an egg that has recently hatched. Even though the old stag doesn't see the egg, he gets a feeling that he's no longer alone, thanks to you and your help. If it hadn't been for you, he would have died alone and purposeless. Same with the grubs. You go around freeing them from their cages, and by the end of the side quest, their father does end up swallowing them, but it's all that but confirmed that he's not eating them. Rather, this is a part of their metamorphosis. The father is now acting as a living cocoon for countless little grubs, who will now grow into beautiful grubberflies. And when you first come upon Dirtmouth, it's an empty town with one lonely old man. As you progress through the game, you slowly populate this town, and while it still remains a ghost town, it feels a lot more lively with Cornifer and Isabella and Sly and Zote and Bretta. Hell, you can help Bretta get over her obsessive romantic tendencies. You can help Grimm and his child with his own cycle of death and rebirth, or alternatively, you can free Brum from his servitude. Even many of the people you do put to rest, you don't do it with violence, but rather with kindness. The Grey Mourner and the Traitor's Child move on of their own volition if you deliver the flower. The Seer either dies or ascends when you finish helping her restore the Dream Nail to its full power. You are death, yes, but you're also kind. If someone doesn't need to die, you can change their lives for the better. Hollow Knight's not a game about death. It's a game about change. About the end of one thing and the beginning of another. And I'm sure you also know where I'm going with this. This is also what transitioning is like. It's not a switch that flicks. You slowly but surely go through your life, trying to put all these signs of your previous life to rest so your new life can begin. Your mind is like the kingdom of Hallownest. Some parts are clinging on to things they shouldn't be clinging on to. Not to be too corny, but there's a pale king on your mind telling you that the old kingdom, your old life, was great and glorious, and you should abandon this idea of a new world and instead do everything in your power to preserve what once was. And yet, at the same time, there is a radiance, a thought that cannot be ignored, a thought that hurts you in little ways, in big ways. No matter how hard you fight it, it is always in your mind. You can't ignore it, and it won't go away. You have to make it go away. And you can either do what the Pale King tried to do everything in your power to go back to the way things were before the Radiance was a problem. I know I did. For a whole year I did. But eventually I accepted that things had to change. I had to change in a lot of ways. Some view transitioning as a form of metaphorical suicide, that their old self is dead and their new self rose from the ashes like a phoenix. Others view it just like any other change. A rather big one, but still just a change. And others view it as simply accepting what always was and what always will be. All that matters is that the vast majority of people who do transition feel a lot better. They feel like a real person, with a real identity, real feelings, and sometimes it's hard. Sometimes it's really hard. Sometimes it's so hard you want to go back to the old ways, or the older ways, to go back to the time and place before you were born, the place you can't come back from. And like the caverns of Hollow Knight, your journey will be littered with the corpses of your kin. The abyss of Hollow Knight is a monolith to all of those like you who didn't make it. And even those who made it out of the abyss, well, one of them is killed by Hornet, you can see it right here, and the other two are possessed by the Radiance and compelled to try and stop you. One of the most difficult things for me to see is a trans person who has failed, for lack of a better word. Maybe they've gone down some internet rabbit hole like 4chan, and now the only way they know how to stave off dysphoria is to make other people's dysphoria worse. Maybe they simultaneously admit and deny their own transgender identity to the point where they're paralyzed, trapped between two worlds and happy in neither. Or maybe they're just dead. To suicide, to a hate crime, something else. It's horrifying, it's depressing, it weighs on you to see so many like you fail, to grapple with the fact that so often it's just a difference of circumstance, to know that you could fail like them too. But you can't ignore it. Can't go around it, can't go above it, can't go below it. You have to go through it, to accept this reality, to confront the horrors of the transgender experience, to confront the horrors of your own existence, and become stronger for it. Change is hard, very hard. It also has to happen, a lot. And often the things you need to change are the things that are the hardest to change, or at least the scariest to think about changing. Pieces of art like Hollow Knight are very important because they allow us to grapple with ideas like death and rebirth and change and letting go in a safe environment, where we can disassociate from ourselves and our day-to-day lives, but not just to turn our brain off and have mindless fun. If it was about mindless fun, I would not have fought Markoth and Radiant, I'll tell you that much. Eventually, though, we have to step outside of the safe space, hopefully better equipped to deal with the reality of things. By facing our fears in a fictional world, we can learn to face them in the real world. I said that many of the trans women I know liked Hollow Knight before they transitioned, and in the end, they did transition. I transitioned, and we're all happier for it. We accept the end of one world or one person, so another can live and thrive. Thank you for watching my video essay to the end. That was a doozy for me to write, speak, edit, and I'm sure it was a doozy to listen to me yapping for this long. If you'd like more of these types of videos, essays, comment, subscribe, pay me $10,000, you know the drill. I have a lot more to say about a lot of things other than just Hollow Knight. In fact, I don't think I'll be doing another Hollow Knight video until Silksong comes out, but I've got concepts for a variety of other analysis videos focused on, but not limited to, video games. Anyway, Thalia out.